tell us a little bit about the first calendar. How and why the first calendar was made.
Okay, I'll start off. The ancient African people of the Nile Valley produced the very first calendar known to the world, which was based upon solar phenomena. And perhaps they developed the calendar about 6,000 years ago, if not earlier. The reason for, one of the reasons, or perhaps the main reason for the invention of the calendar was to be able to regulate the agricultural life of their country, upon which really life in the Nile Valley depended upon the river and, and the agricultural system there. So they developed a calendar which would help them to order, control, and regulate the inundation season, the planting, and the time for the harvest, which enabled them to be one of the main food producers in the Near Eastern area, which other countries depended upon also for, for the sustenance of their life and food production.
We are now, I'm sorry, go ahead.
You know, there might be something important that should be added to that, actually. The reason why the solar calendar, in terms of answering the question, is so important is that it's tied to the tropical cycle, that is food production. Because most early people had a lunar calendar, which is a calendar just as well, but it doesn't fit the cycle of food. So that's why that solar calendar takes up such a major importance, and that's really what makes their calendar so tremendously important. The fact that it fits the food cycle.
Mm-hmm. Could you express that, simplify it a little more for us?
Sure. By the food cycle, we mean, let's say if you're a farmer, you don't want to plant when snow's on the ground because it will kill your crops. I mean, I don't know that much about farming, but I know that. And before people had a calendar, they had to guess when it was time to plant, when it was time to harvest, and so forth. But once they got that system under control and they realized that it occurred a certain time, every time, that helped them to develop the calendar. In other words, when the river overflowed, that's time to let the land get watered, right? And then several cycles later, it was time to plant. And then several cycles later, it was time to harvest. So that was why, that's what you mean by the tropical cycle. Tropical not really meaning over pertaining to tropics, but it's just a name that's given to the food cycle. Mm-hmm. You know, and this we have no control over. The solar system itself controls that. Mm-hmm. So that's basically why that calendar is so important and what you mean by the tropical cycle.
Mm-hmm. We're looking at right now a film that we did while we were at the temple of Convoy, and there is a Nile system. Can you explain that Nile system to us?
The Nile system, or the Nilometer?
The Nilometer.
Okay, the Nilometer. The Nilometer was a way that the ancient Kemetic people had of measuring how high the river would rise each year, so that they would know how to regulate how to control and regulate the irrigation system, so that they would know as accurately as possible how to do the planting for that particular year. So it was a way really of keeping a measurement of the rise of the river each year, so that they could control the agricultural system for better production of food.
In other words, there was a passage at the bottom of that Nilometer.
Yes, actually it's a big well or a big hole in the ground, and it has it's measured. It's
gradated.
It's gradated, so that and each year they would mark it where the river rose. That particular year it was marked, so the record was kept continuously, actually for thousands of years.
Did that have any relationship input into the development of the calendar?
It's definitely related to it, yes, because one of the things that they did do on the Nilometer, they marked the year that well, the year was marked along with the measurement as it was marked.
That nilometer, that measurement, had a lot to do with determining the first block on the calendar called Shamu. So that meant the overflow.
Oh, okay.
So therefore, when the nilometer hit a certain gradation, a certain height, they could tell how much the river would overflow. And that also signaled this first season of their calendar called Shamu. So they were very scientific about what they were doing. It wasn't guesswork at all.
When was the first calendar developed?
Well, when you say the first calendar, it was probably more than likely developed by African peoples. But this solar calendar, most historians have an argument about that. And we sort of agree it's about 6,000 years ago. And but there's arguments going about that. Most of the European scholars are arguing. We're convinced.
Yeah.
We know what
It's
it
at
is.
least 6,000
Easily.
years, but
Easily.
like, as I said before, it may possibly be much older.
Where would it have developed? In particular, what area of Africa?
Well, Egypt, or Kemet, what we call Kemet. The specific locale, that's very hard to pinpoint. But scientifically speaking, it's almost impossible for this calendar to be anything less than, say, 6,000 or 8,000 years. Because developing a calendar is one thing, but to actually put it on paper and have it mathematically measured out, that takes several centuries in order to get a backlog of data to know what to mark, you see. So to try to say that it's only 4,000 years old, when the pyramids are older, and it's almost impossible to build the pyramids without a calendar, you see, it has to be dated back much more than when David did it.
Perhaps you can give us some of the sciences that are necessary then in creating the calendar. What would one have to know in terms of the inch, the second? Are these arbitrary measurements? How do they?
Oh no, nothing arbitrary here at all. But let me say this first. Firstly, there's a confusion of terms here. An inch is a linear type of measurement, and time is not a linear measurement. You see, so we'll take the inch out for a moment, and let's talk about the time. Some of the sciences you need to develop a calendar are quite serious. You need to know a great deal about mathematics. There's no question about that. You need to know physics. You need to know astronomy, and you need to know a little bit of geology, okay, to develop a calendar. And they had that knowledge down to, well, again, an exact science. They were quite good at it. And one thing the ancient Kemites did that really set them apart was they kept data. You see, they kept data. They didn't just proceed haphazardly. They had reams and reams of data. You see, so, and the reason why you need all this science is because the solar calendar is based on the phenomena of the Earth revolving about the sun. So automatically you're talking the solar system. That's the basis of our year. The period, which is what you mean by the length of time it takes to go around once, is 365 days, 5 hours, 48 minutes, and 45.44 seconds. So that's the origin of the year. At that time, they didn't have a name for it, but they meant one full cycle. You see. So you had to know astronomy, you had to know mathematics, and you had to know a little bit of geology.
What would be involved in the type of astronomy that they would need to know at that time?
Well, when you say the type of astronomy, that's a little bit difficult. Astronomy, is astronomy. But you would have to have an accurate charting of planets. You would have to know positions. Right? And again, that comes back to that idea of the data-taking ability that they had, which was astounding. Because you have to remember, they didn't have all the sophisticated astronomical instruments we have today. In fact, they had to invent quite a lot of it. So, charting of planets is absolutely paramount. You must know the position of the planets. And then there was something else that's extremely important I have to point out to you. This idea of leap year. All right. What happens is you're trying to keep the calendar accurate relative to the length of the full cycle. But a calendar, if you notice, only has full days on it. It doesn't have partial days, hours and seconds and that type of thing. Okay. They were the first to realize that the calendar was really too short. So they realized every 4 years the calendar seemed to lose a day. So they recognized that they had to put that day back every 4 years. That's the origin of the leap year. You see, so they could not have gotten that information had they not been taking serious data regularly and well. You see, and in fact, this idea of the leap year is literally etched in stone on a stone called a Kemetic stone, which Rkhty can tell you a great deal about. But this is proof of the fact that they knew it needed an adjustment. I think she can give you a little more about the Kemetic stone.
And I'd just like to add something too about the Kemites in astronomy. Some of the very earliest calendars that you see on the temple walls include not only the yearly cycle, but several astronomical cycles, as well as the recording of the rising and setting of certain stars. So that's a part of the calendar itself, oftentimes. But
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
well, I was just going to say something too about the Kemetic stone, where the Kemites proclaim that the year is actually is more than 365 days, and they institute the concept of the leap year to be observed in Kemet, and that's the first known recording of the leap year.
Now, where is that recording? Which temple?
Well, that is no longer in a temple. The stone has been taken to a museum in Europe, I think in the British Museum.
In terms of science again, I want to follow it up, particularly because so many of our young people have problems with math. And you're telling me that their ancestors, the Africans, created math. You're going to tell me a little bit about the inch. You took that out and separated that.
Yes.
So can you get back to that?
Sure. There's no question that our ancient African ancestors invented mathematics. Now, the Kemites didn't use the concept called an inch. They used something called, it was a subdivision of a fathom, and they're calling it the pyramid inch. Right? Now, this pyramid inch is about as big as what we call the inch, but our inch is the English inch from the English system. And that came from, believe it or not, the human anatomy. For instance, if you take your finger and you do like this, that distance from this knuckle to that knuckle, it was on the king's hand, they would consider that to be an inch. But now a problem resulted from that. When the next king was born, if his fingers were shorter or longer, then your inch changed. So your standard of variation simply was not the same. You can't maintain a civilization with variable measurement system. An inch has to be an inch, and it must be the same inch for you, I, and everyone else, you see. So standardization was important, and the Egyptians knew that. So they standardized all of their units, and they had a thing called the royal cubit. And subdivisions of that, there is something that's close to an inch, right? And it's actually literally etched on black granite, so it doesn't vary. Now let me say this to you. Thousands of years later, approximately 5,000, 6,000 years later, so-called Western civilization, modern civilization, copied the exact same idea of trying to maintain what you mean by a fixed standard length. As severe as France, I'm not certain if I'm pronouncing it correctly because I don't speak French that well, but as severe as France, there's an international bar that's kept of platinum iridium, and it's at a certain temperature, and there's a mark etched on it. And that mark is something like an inch. Then they have another one with a centimeter marked on it. And the reason why it's kept at that temperature is to maintain that standard. Now, in the National Bureau of Standards and Weights here in Washington, D.C. in America, they have a similar bar. And they compare these two bars periodically to maintain the accuracy. So the reason why you need an inch is because when you're building something, you need subdivisions of length. Let us say you're building something that's a yard long. Well, that's fine. But what if you have to build something that's half that size, or half that size, or half that size? So you need some fine, I guess you would call it graininess of measurement, and that was the inch. But it started out being quite arbitrary. That is to say, the distance between this amount of space.
Can you tell us a little bit about the pyramids and their relationship to the calendar? What does the pyramids include in terms of its computation to build it? What would one need to know to build the pyramids?
interesting question. You say a little bit. You could go on at length about the pyramids. You see, well, here's the essential thing. When we get a look at the calendar, you'll see a picture there, and you'll see them charting the path of a star. The star is going, its ray is going down to the ground, and they're measuring it precisely. At that precise point is where a pyramid would be built, and this star's gaze would go right down into the pyramid and illuminate a little room there. Right? So stars and their brilliance help determine positions of pyramids. Now, the Kemites were so bright that they were able to determine the exact cardinal positions of the pyramid, that is to say north, east, south, and west, without using a compass. Because nowhere is a compass found in Egypt, that is to say in Kemetic. So the question becomes, how were they able to define north, east, south, and west? They did it by these objects called obelisk, which is Cleopatra's needle and that type of stuff. There's a way you can trisect it, and you can get true north from that. And they were able to do that. You see, so they weren't just decorations. Everything they built had a purpose. Now, you cannot build the pyramids without a calendar. Because let's say the Great Pyramid of Giza, Khufu's pyramid, which is what we call the Great Pyramid. European books would call it Cheops pyramid, but we call it Khufu's pyramid because it's after Pharaoh Khufu, and that was his name. Mm-hmm. When you attempt to build that pyramid, you need thousands of people. Well, how can you call all these people together at the same time simultaneously if you don't know what time it is? Mm-hmm. See? So the calendar regulated time, that is to say when the work crews should be there. The calendar regulated cooking, because when you're trying to cook for 10, 15,000 people at one time, you see, you must have this thing efficiently under control. Who's cooking the vegetables, who's cooking the meat, who has the wine and so forth. That has to be all organized. Imagine a gigantic catering party, if you will. Right? So the calendar had to regulate that. Also, some of the granite stones that they used on this pyramid, some weigh as much as 5 tons. And the granary was several miles, away. So the only way they could get it, and not the only way, but one of the ways they did it was by going along the river. But the river had to overflow enough such that they could float on barges and get the stones there. So when does the river overflow? The calendar tells you. Mm-hmm. So everything, their whole life cycle centered around that calendar. You see. Mm-hmm. So, and the pyramids, it's really, I don't know, kind of like an unfair question to ask because it's so enormous in its mathematical and scientific complexity that you really couldn't cover it in a 2-hour show, that type of thing. Mm-hmm. You could go on at length about those pyramids, which I have done. I've studied it extensively, and it's really quite superb, the method and the mathematics that's in there. There's no question about it.
Well, I definitely want to do a whole program around just the pyramids. But we're looking, again, here at the Temple of Indra, we're looking at that zodiac. How does that zodiac in particular relate to the calendar that the Kemetic people of ancient time?
Let's start Rkhty. I think she has a really good information on that.
Fine. Just to go back for a moment to what I said before about the ancient calendars having, as part of the whole calendar, the constellations and stars and the time of the rising and setting of stars, etc. At Dendera, what we see is a group of constellations of stars as defined by the ancient Kemetic people. In other words, it's like a sky chart or a star map with the various constellations presented. At Dendera, a temple which was built during the Ptolemaic period, we have not only the ancient Kemetic star chart or sky map of constellations, but we also have combined with that the Greek constellations which were in use at that time. So we have both there at Dendera, and so it's a very important temple or representation to look at, to learn about the ancient African depiction of the sky or star chart, as well as the one in current use by the Greeks at that particular time. For example, the ancient Kemetic people, what the ancient Greek people called Capricorn was called Ba, or depicted as a ram by the ancient African people. What the ancient Greeks called Cancer, the crab, was depicted by the ancient
Start with, yeah, Bob. What they call Bob.
what the ancient uh, Greeks called Capricorn was was depicted by the ancient Egyptians or the ancient Kemites as Ba, the ram. What the ancient Greeks called Cancer, the crab, was depicted by the ancient Kemites as Keper, a beetle. So all of the people of the world actually have their own way of viewing and describing the various constellations that appear in the sky, even though they're the same for everyone, but everyone sees them different according to their own cultural concepts and ideas. So at Dendera, both the Greek and the ancient Kemetic constellations are depicted.
How much older is the ancient Kemetic calendar than the Greek calendar? When do the Greeks come about to put together a calendar? And was their calendar influenced by the ancient Africans?
Absolutely. There are sky charts or star maps that go all the way back to the Fifth Dynasty, and those are just the ones that we know about. But it's quite logical to think that they're very ancient. They go back very far. Even they had to have been known. The stars and the constellations had to have been known before the calendar came into being.
Absolutely.
So the Greeks probably learned the whole science of astronomy in the first place from the ancient African people of Kemet, and therefore they learned the mapping of the sky from the Kemites, and then they simply defined or described the constellations that were there in terms of their own cultural concepts.
That has to be, some more has to be said about that. The ancient Greeks, they had no calendar in effect. That is to say, on the order of accuracy and stability as the solar calendar. They had a lunar calendar, which is nothing compared to the accuracy that you can get with the solar calendar. And as I pointed out, it's not related to the agricultural cycle. So in effect, when the Greeks came to Egypt at that time, they learned everything truly about a real calendar from the ancient Kemites. And they also learned a great deal about astronomy, as Kitty pointed out, from them. And this is clear because there is no real history of Greek astronomy up until the time they entered Egypt. You see? So the stage is set and the data is there. It's not a matter of opinion. And I just want to say one other thing about the astronomy versus that question you were taking up. There is a bum rap that's sort of given, thrown on the Kemites, that is to say the Egyptians, that they were very much engaged in soothsaying and witchcraft and sorcery and that type of thing. No, there was a clear distinction that they made between scientific involvement and religious and spiritual and otherworldly type endeavors. There was a clear distinction they made because astrology by itself could never create the calendar. Astrology helped create astronomy, the science of astronomy. Because in order to, that is to say, find your house in the sky and that type of thing, you have to know where your planet is. Well, in order to know where your planet is, you have to know how to chart the skies. So astrology is not a science. Right? Astrology is a belief, cultural, that type of thing. And there may be some validity to it, there may not. It's more than it is not. But astronomy is an actual science, and astronomy grew out of astrology. So had they not had astrology, they would never have astronomy. Had they not had astronomy, you would never have the calendar.
So we're really talking about and relating the zodiac and how people want to read the zodiacs in terms of science and etc. Now, but how does that zodiac affect the charting of the stars, the 12 cardinal points? Can you speak on that?
Well, a little. I don't want to go too far into this because I'm not, quote, an astrologer, but the calendar still has some vestiges of, of astrology. You see, they divided the sky into the 12 houses of the 12 constellations. They also call them deacons, right? And that's shown in the 12 months of the calendar, right? But it just so happened that 12 months of 30 days each fit exactly within a year. That is to say, 360 days. So the 12s matched the 12s and everything was good. And there's another thing there. The Earth, revolves on its axis every 24 hours. So 24 divided by 2 is 12. So the 12 houses, the day of a given day with 24 hours, and the 12 months in the year, there's a relationship there. So I suspect they knew the revolution of the Earth first, and then said, let us divide all of life, if you will, into 12 segments. Right? But that was part of the religious system, part of primitive beliefs, and part of some other things that I really don't know where they got it from. But they knew the difference between that and science. You see, they knew the difference. Because had they not known the difference, you would never have gotten that calendar. And all the other mathematics that they knew in science. They knew the difference.
How does all this information relate to African American people today in our struggle for liberation? Why should one want to redo the calendar, study the calendar? We have a calendar, Why should we know more?
You have a way of asking the most
There are
profound questions.
two types of answers to that. I'll
Sure.
answer it first and then let Reese, because there is the cultural, social aspect of a calendar, and then there's the science of the calendar, which is important. So I could just address really the social, cultural aspect of the calendar. The calendar that we use, that's being used today, that calendar that was designed by the Western world, namely the Gregorian and the Julian calendars, are calendars which express Western culture and Western cultural concepts. For example, the aspect of the 7-day week, which was really introduced into the calendar during the time of Constantine by the Christians, corresponds to their cultural concept or idea of the 7 days of creation, and then the Sabbath day being the rest day, the seventh day.
Wait a minute. There was not 7 days?
No. There was
the first time I ever heard that.
Oh, really? Yes. Well, the ancient Kemetic calendar had a month of exactly 30 days each, and so there were actually three sets of 10s. There was a 10-day week, and it wasn't until the time of Constantine, when they had their own calendar design, that they introduced the 7-day week, which was not commensurate with the month, with the actual astronomical cycle at all. So it caused the days of the calendar to continuously change, and there became that aspect of changeability in the calendar, which Reese will probably say a few words about. Also, they began to name the days of the week after Indo-European gods, and so every time we actually say the names of the days of the week, we are, in a sense, evoking the Indo-European or Saxon gods and giving reverence and homage to them. Also, the Western calendar is designed to regulate its working system. Well, for the most part, the capitalistic system and the working system of the society as a whole. Another thing is that it depicts European or Western holidays and celebrations, and does not depict celebrations and holidays of African people. So every time we use the Western calendar, namely the Gregorian and the Julian calendar, we are participating in their culture and their way of life. We are evoking their gods, and we are evoking their cultural concepts. That is why it's imperative, really, for African people to use a calendar which speaks to them, which gives reverence and pays homage to our culture and our cultural concepts.
Yes.
So I'm going to let Reese talk about the other aspect of that.
Now, that was excellent, what she said, but here is the serious thing about that. You said you have a way of asking these very deep questions in a very subtle way, and I can answer this one straight away. You said, how does it relate to our liberation struggle, and we have a calendar, you said. That's just it. The only people that have a calendar is us, African peoples. That calendar, the one that you said, we have a calendar, that is an African calendar. You see, that calendar started with the ancient Kemites. Julius Caesar, when they invaded Egypt around 42 BC, they had a very clumsy and inefficient lunar calendar. So they took this calendar wholesale with no changes whatsoever, including the leap year. That's why it's called the Julian calendar. But Julius Caesar had nothing whatsoever to do with its invention, its modification, nothing at all. All he did was steal it and put his name on it. That's the origin of your Julian calendar and your so-called Julian date. Furthermore, they were so superstitious, they changed the first day to January 1st, which there is no scientific reason for that at all, you see. Then, Pope Gregory came along in the 15th century, around 1582. The calendar had already lost about 13 days because it tends to slow down. It tends to run ahead. So he had two of his scientists try to correct the problem. But since they had no scientific methodology, they were guessing, you see. So they guessed how to, make the calendar a little better. And then he put his name on it. That's why it's called the Gregorian calendar. And that is the calendar that's hanging on the walls today. That is not a European invention. That is an African calendar. So when you say, how does it relate to our liberation struggle? It relates this way. They tried to say African peoples have no history. In fact, when I was going to school as a youth, I was taught that until I began to read. Not only do we have a history, no one else has a history compared to ours, you see. And each time any European person wishes to say we have no history, all they have to do is ask themselves, what time is it? And they're talking about us because the time is defined by the calendar. And the calendar is an ancient African invention. Okay. With all the crack and narcotics and destruction of our children in the school system, it is important that they know their people did one of the most important things in terms of the human existence on this earth. Without the calendar, you have no physics, no astronomy, no history, no medicine, nothing that involves any sense of time, you see. And you said we're going to do another program on the calendar. At that time, I'm going to great detail as to what I mean by that, and this will be backed up. And just one other thing I need to say, with the calendar, yes, as Rkhty pointed out, it has all these European names. For instance, August is named after the Emperor Augustus, and July named after Julius Caesar, and so forth, which is meaningless, because neither one of them had anything to do with that calendar. But the calendar itself, without those names, is the African calendar. Therefore, it becomes extremely important what Rkhty has done, in that she's reclaimed the original names, you see, in hieroglyphs. So if we then learn the original names, and we learn Shamu and Pert and Aket and so forth, Rempent and Sopadet and all of that, we will be invoking African gods when we refer to the calendar. But the calendar mathematically is the same calendar. They just sort of clouded it with European wording, you follow. But that is an ancient African invention.
And changed the day, you said.
Absolutely, they changed. They made some modifications that again had really, I can't see the reason why. For instance, Constantine the Great was the one that made the week 7 days. But that was made to reserve their religious holidays, whereas the seventh day they called a Sabbath was a day of rest and so forth. The ancient calendar had 10 days in each week, not 7. And so that was done. Furthermore, they changed the lengths of the months themselves. The ancient African calendar had 30 days each month. Now, that may not seem like a major thing, but it is. By keeping all the months the same days, each day remains the same in your calendar. It's an extremely intelligent calendar. For instance, when we do show it, you'll notice it has no date. Like, for instance, the calendar we have on the wall now will say 1987. This is a perpetual calendar. It doesn't have to have a date because the days never change. For instance, my birthday this year was on a Thursday. Next year it'll be a Friday. Next year it'll be Saturday and Sunday. It'll cycle.
According to our present calendar.
Exactly. But according to the ancient African Kemetic calendar, whatever day my birthday landed on, or anybody's day, or any date that is to say at all, will always land on the exact same day, as well as the exact same numerical day. You see, it's an extremely intelligent calendar. Now that calendar concept was copied by some folks that were calling themselves the World Calendar Association. And when I recall reading that about 6 or 7 years ago, and I thought it was quite clever, not knowing that that's nothing more than a copy of the ancient African Egyptian calendar in its original form. They called it the World Calendar, you see. But back to our liberation struggle, once this information has gotten out to our children and the adults, that not only did we do great things, we did things that are still defining the world. Everybody uses that calendar, you see. And then we could, you could take it a little further. I invented the best calendar that could possibly be made, but the base of it is that calendar right there.
Let's take a look at that calendar. And let's talk about it. Let's talk about how it came about. Can you hold it up and get some close-ups of it?
Can you see it? Is it too much glare?
Yeah, that's, can you hold it around a little more?
Around a little bit?
Yeah, watch the monitor. Okay. All right, that's good. That's good. That's so good.
Okay. What we're looking at now on the screen is the drawing which depicts the star on which the calendar year is based. This star was called Kemetic by the ancient Kemites. Today, it is called Sirius by modern astronomers. And of course, the star Sirius is very important to African people all over the continent. When this star rises helically, or heliacally, that is, with the sun in the early morning twilight, an event which occurs once each year, that's where the ancient Kemites marked the beginning of the year. And they called it the Perit Sopetit, the coming forth of the star Sopetit. That was day one of the year, the heliacal rising of the star. Okay. Here we see the calendar itself, which is divided into 3 seasons. The first season being the inundation season, Shimu, water. The second season, Perit, which means the growing season or the coming forth season. And the third season, Akhet, the harvest season, which is depicted with a field of growing plants. Each season has 4 months. Each month has exactly 30 days, which gives us a 360-day year. And because the year is longer than that, the 5 days longer of the year are added at the end of the year. Each of the 5 days for the Kemetic people just symbolize or represent one of the natures or gods, if you wish, of the ancient people. And in 1988, this calendar corresponds to the Gregorian calendar, 87 and 88. We will have the leap year, the concept which was invented by the ancient Kemites themselves. This particular calendar is made to correspond to or is synchronized with the Gregorian calendar now in use by the Western world, just so that we can know where we are in relationship to the Western calendar.
And there's something here, as I was pointing out to you, how intelligent this calendar is. And its sin is right here. The fact that this is in a block, this season, that season, that season, 4 months, 4 months, 4 months. This is 120 days, 120 days, 120 days, which makes 360. Notice the 5 days are separate from these blocks. These are the 5 days down here, the festive days in the leap year. That is what makes this calendar so scientifically intelligent. By all of these months being the same length and each season being the same number of months, the days never change in this block, you see. By leaving those 5 days out, you maintain what you call high unchangeability. The calendar never changes. For instance, Misa Ra 1 is on a Sunday. It will always be on a Sunday because of the way in which you count. Now that takes a little bit of explaining, which I won't go into now, but suffice it to say that it's because of the arrangement. 120, 120, 120. If you notice, our present calendar has 29 days, 30 days, 31 days. That is what keeps the calendar changing incessantly, you see. So they were extremely clever people. They knew what they were doing. They knew exactly what they were doing. And if you notice, there's no date here. You don't see 1987. You don't see any date at all, because this calendar is good for all time.
Now,
I might also point out one other thing to you. The original African calendar didn't have these beautiful designs at all. This was Rkhty's doing and the artists, you see. So we made it this way, suitable for framing, such that when we purchase it, we should look at this on our walls. This should be in every African house, everywhere there are Africans. This calendar should be there. That's why we made it so beautiful.
how would one go about purchasing this calendar and finding out more information about what we've talked about today? Did you also publish a book on this?
Oh, yes, we published a book that explains the calendar, and it also explains the science and mathematics of calendars in general, because there's no point in doing all this if a person can't understand what's here. And as I pointed out, Rkhty has put the original hieroglyphs here and the original names, and so this book is a guide to the calendar, the first part of it, and the second part of this book tells you all about the complexity of making a calendar. It is not an easy task, okay? And in fact, to that extent, let me point this out. It's a little difficult to say without sounding, as if I'm bragging, but it has to be said. No peoples were able to develop a science of calendars. They were all guessing as to how to keep the calendar accurate. Well, in the process of us doing this work, I developed and created the first science of calendars. And that science has enabled me to make, as I pointed out earlier, the most accurate calendar that can be made by the solar system. The only way that calendar can change is the solar system itself has to change. You see, so all of that's in the book. And there's another publication that I'm doing. It's far more technical for our African scientists and engineers and scholars that would like to go to the full extent. This calendar goes into outer space calendars and all of that. But it's important for our youth to see this book and to read it and to try to understand it.
How would one go about getting that? Is it sold at any regular stores?
Well, we don't know if we're allowed to make a commercial here, but we have flyers, and you can mail it. You mail in the flyers to the Harlem Mathematics Academy. We're using that as a distribution center. And we also have sent the books to different black bookstores throughout America. Oh, also, I have to tell you, it's been installed in the Schomburg Library. It's also been installed in the Langston Hughes Library out in Queens. And we're presently trying to get it into the entire library system. Also at the lecture series, First World and ASCAC and so forth, we sell them there. And this book and the calendar sell for $25. And it's certainly worth it. I mean, this is suitable for framing, and it really should be in your house.
Let me phrase this question another way.
You want us to continue holding this up?
Most of the research and the work of this calendar can be found where you're presently the director, and that is where?
Oh, that's the Harlem Mathematics Academy.
So if one would come to the Harlem Mathematics Academy, they can get further research on this?
Oh, sure. And really, for the layperson, they should start with this book. This book is titled The Calendar Project. Rkhty and I wrote it together. It's written in such a style that there is mathematics and physics in it, but there's a reason why that was done also. You see, there's this myth again that they try to perpetrate that African peoples are not very scientific. We're good at basketball and music and that type of thing. That's the world's worst myth. The ancient Kemites were the leaders in mathematics and science and physics and all. They invented all of it. And it's as natural as rolling off a log. So we wrote this to try to encourage African peoples to get back to being as great as we were in the sciences, you see. And this is an excellent book to start with. So In order to get it, you would have to just write to the Harlem Mathematics Academy. We have flyers. We'll send it to you, and you can order it.
What is the address?
Well, the address is
I don't guess you could say the most important aspect. But for our young people, what is key for them to absorb, to effect a change in their consciousness that would ultimately lead to real liberation of African people?
okay. That question is again extensive, you know, and
No.
yeah, there is no real one thing, but there are certain components that I think are critically important. And the first is self-realization as an African. You see, we've been taught as a people to hate ourselves, to hate our history, to hate our country, when in fact all of humanity stems from us. And the majority of the wonderful and profound things this world has, we invented. So firstly, our youth and adults, you know, have to be made aware of our extensive, great, and profound history. That there's no shame whatsoever in being an African. None whatsoever. In fact, it's the highest form of human being. So that certainly is crucial, you know, the cultural and the historical content. Without that, I think you have nothing, because you're just producing clones that will do what someone else tells them, because they already think of themselves as worthless, and therefore they can gain some measure of esteem by having someone else direct them, especially if they're taught that this other person is superior and they're inferior, you see. So they're constantly groping at nonsense. So that certainly is first. And then, and this isn't just because I'm a scientist, science and the doing of science, the learning of science, the daily bathing in science is critical. The world is going to be shaped, as it is right now, by scientific minds, you see. The people that control science and technology will control the world. So it's as simple as that.
So then it is crucial for African youth to develop a scientific understanding.
Absolutely. A scientific mentality, a scientific outlook, you see. Because I have a theory about this. Our creativity journey comes through in the channels that we're allowed to express it in a broad sense of the word. And in America, generally, it's been sports and music. That, to me, is extremely limited. Our creativity is so broad and so enormous that we can do the same things in any endeavor you choose to mention, whatever it is. You know, and my mission, if you will, or my divine sacred project is to affect young African children.
Shall you put him in the basement? He got a loose. Hold on a moment. We're doing an interview, Linda. The way you were relating it to the areas of development that youth have to go. Wait till she go up so we don't pick up the background noise. You can come back down if you want to. The dog has made a mess. But see, the dog is my God at night. He goes down to the basement and protects all the equipment.
I understand. He's needed. It's a valuable function.
Go ahead.
Okay. See, our youth are being misguided, and really, in effect, they're being destroyed. And
is that a conspiracy?
Oh, not only is it a conspiracy, you see, there's two ways to stop greatness. One way is to simply stop it outright. Another way is to convince it, get hold of its mind and convince it that it's worthless. Then it will stop itself. And that's what they've done to us as a people and are doing to us as a people, and especially our youth. And you see, it's easy to do to the youth because, you know, young people are gullible, they have no experience, and they really don't know how vicious this system is. You see, if you take two children, you know, one is a Caucasian, whatever, and the other is an African child, they're going to grow up and compete with each other. You know, so in order for the Europeans to maintain all the spoils and all the power and everything else, they have to stop that child. You know, if you can hinder that child and dement that child, when it is a child, it will grow up to be an ignorant person, easily controllable, easily used, easily abused. So it's a very, very simple thing. Now, I'm going to say something to you that may sound a little strange. We seem to have this great concern with the crack in the neighborhoods and the dope and that type of thing. Sure, that's certainly critical. There's no two ways about that. But there's something far, far more critical than that. and that's the school system.
Oh, yes.
That's the school system, because once you get a hold of the child's mind and you destroy that, you don't need crack or anything. That person is already useless. That person will never amount to anything. And in fact, that person will be forced to turn on his own kind to survive. And that may take on violent means, any means that person can dream up. You see, because they say, well, we'd like to hire you and so forth, but you have no skills. You can't read. You can't do any mathematics. So it's not racism on our part. You just don't know anything. Well, after 20 years of miseducation and abuse and neglect, it's absolutely true. You don't know anything. So that's the general broad scope. Now let's get specific. Science, mathematics. Our children are taught systematically, thoroughly, methodically, that is not for you. You can't do it well, and basically you should be doing something that doesn't tax you as much. And they try to drum this frame of reference on the children. And after a while, it's quite successful. You know, because they go home and they have math homework, for instance, and the mother will say, well, I don't know how to do that. Ask your father. He'll say, well, I don't know that either. So he begins to build up a picture. African peoples don't know mathematics and science and physics. I'm an African child, therefore I shouldn't have to know it either. Why should I crack my head with that? Let those other folks do it. And so long as you let those other folks do it, they will control you and your world. The world is becoming more and more scientific, not less. So the education of our children in general, and the scientific education in particular, and with that strong cultural base, that is what is needed. There's no question about it. It's not even a point of debate. That murder is far more significant than the crack and the narcotics and all that, because you're talking about the entire country and then the entire world. You know, because a lot of, let's say, West Indian folks that I know, my friends and so forth, they come from the Caribbean and they say they have a good education. They were taught British forms. But what else was taught? Hold on. What else was taught? You know, you were taught to adore and appreciate and love white people. There's nothing wrong with that if you were also taught at the same time to love, appreciate, and adore yourself. But you're not. I studied all the physics I studied and all the mathematics I studied. Not once, not even once, in any of the textbooks that I studied from, was there any mention of Africa as contributing to science and technology. Not one African scientist was ever shown in these books at all, you see. And I have a library consisting of more than 2,000 books, my own personal library. I've been building it since I was 14 years old. And not in one of those books can you find a contribution by African peoples, when in fact, the whole foundation of physics and mathematics comes from African peoples. You see, so I can't overemphasize that somehow they must go hand in hand. There must be a strong, serious cultural base, which Rkhty will talk about at length. And there must be a strong, serious scientific base. All the playing and everything else in between, sure, you can have that also, but those two are paramount. And we've got to infect our youth with this way of thinking. That life is more than just rapping, spinning on your head, and basically having a good time. You know, they're making our children very non-intellectual, and we simply can't have that. We somehow have to get control of our youth, claim our youth back, because they're destroying themselves, and the world at large is helping to destroy them systematically, especially the young men. So it's that strong cultural base and that strong scientific base. If we don't do that, we will perish as a people. There's no two ways about it.
Perish?
Perish, be destroyed, eliminated, wiped out. And if you don't think it can happen, absolutely, absolutely. And if you don't think it can happen, so did the Jews during the time of Hitler. That was unheard of, the very idea that someone would exterminate them, but it happened, you see. And what they're doing now is, since things are becoming more scientific and more technical, those things that aren't scientific or technical or don't have the ability to negotiate that are considered superfluous, useless. You see, even factory work. There is a factory up in Pitney Bowes in Connecticut, Stamford, Connecticut, that is fully automated. When you open the doors, you don't see any people. These machines are running the entire factory. A person comes in every now and then and looks at things. But basically, the factory is completely automated. So factory work is becoming obsolete. Work that requires low education, low training is becoming obsolete. They're getting machines to do that. We're now entering the age of robotics. Robots are running around doing things, and they're becoming more and more sophisticated. So those people that do not have science and technology and a scientific base will perish. You'll be superfluous. So again, you see you touched a kind of magic button when you asked that question. And I could talk at length about it, but I won't. I'd like you to hear Rkhty's views on that strong cultural base I was talking about, because she has some very strong views about that too. In fact, I think any serious African educator, if that is not paramount in his mind, then he or she is not doing their job properly. So I can give you Rkhty, and she could elaborate on that.
All right. First of all, I agree with Reese that culture and science are the two most important aspects of the education of African children. First of all, the cultural base is at the top of the list and perhaps the most important, I think, because African people have African people have a completely different vision of the world than European people do. We have a completely different understanding and appreciation and being than Europeans do.
That's all right.
And because of that, because of our vision of the world, because of the way we are, because of the way that we relate to each other, and the way that we relate to nature, we need to really fully begin to participate and to develop our natural state of being again. For those of us who have lived in the diaspora all of these centuries, we have taken on the ways of Western man, and we have begun to incorporate his vision of the world and his way of being and participating in the planet. And that way has proven to be, from time immemorial, since the beginning of his existence here, very detrimental to life itself, to the life of the planet, to the life of the cosmos, to the life of all existence. And so therefore, here we are, functioning and participating and learning in that state of being, in that situation, and we are becoming now contributors to that destruction and to that destructive force. However, if we understood ourselves, and if we understood our natural state of being, then we would create and produce things that would enhance life and develop life and try to create harmony in life. And so therefore what I'm saying is that we must understand ourselves, we must understand the African way, we must develop that so that we can begin to produce and create life-giving things for ourselves and for the entire earth. It is probably not an exaggeration to say that if European science continues in the direction that it is going in, that all life is in jeopardy on this planet, and that none of us will be around much longer. But if African people could once again come into themselves, we could begin to turn that around and to move the forces in the opposite direction. Right now, when we go to their universities and their schools, we are taught in their mode of science. We are taught these destructive ways and means of doing things. Even though African people are the inventors of the basis of all of these sciences and arts, it is what the European has done with them and how he has organized them and how he applies his technology has been nothing but destructive. But yet still, that's what we learn when we go to school, and that's all we learn. So therefore, and that's in all fields of science, as well as medicine as well as all of the arts, everything has been affected by his mode of thought, by his thinking processes, by his scientific method, by the way that he has decided to do things. So therefore, we need to know ourselves so that we can create something of African people, so that we can create something of ourselves, so that we can create something that produces life instead of producing death. And without that cultural foundation, without an understanding of ourselves, and without an understanding of the African way of life, we cannot do that. So that's number one, that's essential. And we need to begin to understand that too. Our children need to begin to understand that when we go to school, we are not learning in the way and the mode of production that is of African people. That the science, the mathematics, the physics, the astronomy, the space program, medicine, everything is, we need to begin to realize that that is not us, and that is not of us, and that is not the way that we would do things, and that is not the only way of doing things. We have this great faith, in European science. We see it as some great and glorious, what should I say? Entity or something,
Yeah.
and we don't even realize that there are other ways of doing everything. And perhaps, and not only perhaps, but it would only actually be those other ways that can turn the destructive forces into creative and life-giving forces. So it's really, really essential that we begin to understand ourselves and understand our culture and understand our way of being and our way of life. Science is absolutely, definitely the key to the future, but not European scientific modes of action and doing things, but an African thought process, an African scientific method, an African creative way of being and thinking, acting, and doing. That is the way to the future. I think really European Western science has just about gone its limit anyway. That's my own personal feeling. In every field of science, and that there's got to be a new impetus anyway from African people to carry it a step further. The European has created some serious destructive machinery, some serious tools and mechanisms for destructive purposes, and therefore we as African people are going to have to understand those thoroughly, to master those thoroughly, as well as master a new science, which is far more formidable than theirs. But we have to know both, and we have to really seriously begin with that. Otherwise, as Reese said, we are in trouble as a race, and the whole planet is in trouble.
There is something there that should be made absolutely clear. It was triggered when Rkhty said as a race, we're in trouble. Africa is the richest continent on the face of the earth in terms of minerals, resources, everything. The United States is destroying itself, the land, the actual country itself. So is Europe, the majority of the earth. Africa virtually is untapped. It's an untapped resource. That's why the South African Nazi regime, and that's what it is, are so vicious and so violent, because they realize they are entrenched. They have a foothold, so they're going to try to stay there. If the other nations could get away with the ruthlessness that they do, they would do it, because they need Africa's resources and minerals. Well, it's easy to take it if you keep the people ignorant, especially scientifically ignorant, distort and destroy their culture and their background, make them ashamed of themselves. They'll give it to you for nothing. Literally, they'll give it to you for nothing. And even if they don't give it to you for nothing, you have enough scientific power to take it. So it becomes crucial that African peoples learn science And it's such a terrible irony that here we have to struggle to get us to understand this again, when in fact we started out with it. We invented it. And another note that she was saying, I'll touch on the humane aspect of science. In all of my studies, I never had a professor say to me, say for instance we're studying physics, that this is beautiful. I say it's beautiful because to me it is beautiful. Science is life. And when I teach the students at the academy, we say things are beautiful. So they say it's beautiful. Because children are susceptible to what they hear and what they see, the visual impact and the audible impact. And when you tell a child, this thing is beautiful that you're doing, they begin to say exactly what you say. Then they actually begin to see the beauty, they begin to feel the beauty, then they always demand that beauty from everything you put in front of them. Then that challenges the teacher. If this child is going to demand beauty of you, the highest form, then you must be capable to do that. And if you're not, it's going to show through, and the child is not going to be interested in you. So, when they put these teachers in front of our children that are incompetent, don't care about them, you know, and are miseducating them purposely, culturally misguiding them, then of course the child does poorly. Then they say, your child has learning disability. Your child can't be taught well. That's not it at all. It's how well are you teaching and what are you teaching? Who wants to hear something negative about themselves all the time? Who wants to hear that I can't read and you are not teaching me how to read? You follow? So I do fault the school system. And I'm not talking about the righteous African teachers that are teaching there and those that mean well, or the Caucasian ones at all. I'm saying that wholesalely, the majority of them, it is useless. You know, and they do not teach our children well. And that is systematically, methodically, and purposely done. And I would challenge and debate anybody on that account, to any extent. Because certainly in any school population, there is a certain percentage of children that will not do well. There's a certain percentage that will excel. If you look at the probability distribution, the majority of the people fall within that middle region. There's like a 10% type of child that they will never do well. There's a 10% type of children that will do exceptionally well. But the majority of the people fit in a greater region of the probability distribution. So you expect a certain amount of failure, okay? But the enormous numbers of failure that we have, our children attending school, it cannot be by accident. It just simply cannot be. That is absurd. And furthermore, the same children that are failing in mathematics and physics, when they come to the Harlem Mathematics Academy, all of a sudden, not only do they begin to pass, they begin to excel. What is the difference? The difference is that we are here to teach and you are here to learn. We are here to discipline and you are here to obey. We are here to show that we love and respect you, and you are here to show that you love and respect us. We are teaching things that are beautiful, and we expect you to feel that way about it. We expect you to get excited. You know, you can get excited about other things than dancing and playing, you know, football and baseball and all that, and rapping and so forth. You can get excited about knowledge. You can get excited about ideas. These type of words are strange to our children. These words are alien to them. You see, that intellectual tradition is ripped out of them, you know, and they're dementing these children. They're dementing them wholesale. Again, I'll say to you, far more serious and far more significant than the drugs. Because they think that's a natural way of life, to be ignorant and to be silly and to play games all the time and to waste your life away. They think that's the natural order of events because that's what they're taught.
I have finally one question for each of you, both in a different category. The first, I want to ask you again, and perhaps both of you may want to answer both of these questions. But I'd like, from your understanding and study of European culture, why is it such a negative culture against life force as a whole? Spiritually, the highest goal of any religious order is to be associated with the wonders of the universe and to bring life as opposed to death. We live in a culture that is the exact opposite. It exhibits selfishness, greed, the personal me as opposed to we. It is the exact opposite factors that produce life in its wholesome principle sphere. Why do you think that is of European expression? And to you, Rkhty, you spoke of us having to change, get into ourselves, understand an African value to exhibit, to express, to again create an African motif, to bring life. You thought that European science has exhausted itself and was on the verge of destroying humanity. Somewhere out there, the understanding of science as projected through the African was a oneness with the universe itself. We came about the building of the pyramids because we understood a oneness that we had with God and with the universal principle, with that undefinable principle. But when we breathed air, we realized that that was the same air absolute through all of the universe. The water that was in the Nile River and the oceans was the same water that flowed through our bodies, so we weren't separated from it. Do you believe then that there are principles and secrets and the understanding of all of these things that are locked into the universe that will free us, that if we can become spiritually in tune, will be unveiled to us, to the mind that again becomes one with the universe, because the universe has a mind of survival? While you think about it, perhaps you can answer the question.
Okay, again, you have a way of asking very powerful questions in a very soft and subtle way. I'll try my best to answer you your question as to why the Europeans are so life-destructive and seemingly just mad with the manner in which they're conducting themselves. I've thought about this long and hard, and I've come to the conclusion that it stems from the stupidity of arrogance. Right? Now, that doesn't mean that they are stupid, because no race of people is stupid. It comes from the stupidity of arrogance, the arrogance of power. In other words, if they took science and immediately saw that they could make some strong weaponry with this, which they did. Once you make strong weapons, you can destroy many powerful warriors in a very easy manner. For instance, you could have specially trained troops on the ground, hundreds of thousands of them. One airplane drops 2 bombs, 3 bombs, you've destroyed all of them. So that makes you the winner, in effect, of that conflict. But it doesn't really make you the stronger. You've won a violent confrontation because you have weaponry and systems to help you, machines to do it for you. Okay. The common valor, one-on-one, you didn't display that. You had a more systematic and efficient way of destroying them. So that's what they've done with science. Now, that has made them arrogant. They have translated that simple phenomena and really substandard phenomena into some sort of exalted sense of self, that they in fact are some sort of superior being, which is total and serious stupidness. There is nothing superior about anyone white relative to anyone black or African. There is nothing. And there is nothing superior about anyone African or black relative to anyone white. The key issue is, what do you bring to the individual condition of life? What is the quality of your mind? What are your abilities, you see? If they can demean you in such a way that by the time you begin to think about who you are and what you can do, it's already too late because you now hate yourself, then in a kind of global way, you can stop a whole race of people. And this is what they're doing. By distorting African history, by destroying the children in the school system. Look, if my parents were destroyed in the school system, then I'm destroyed in the same school system, then my children are destroyed in the same school system. By the time you hit the 5th or the 4th generation, no one remembers doing anything great. No one remembers that we were ever worth anything. Worthwhile, that is. So we continue to self-destructive and ignorant ways against each other. So, once you are accustomed to having the power, which is what the Caucasians have, you become arrogant. And that arrogance breeds a kind of stupidity and a contempt. You actually begin to think that, in fact, you are, quote, better. And all these are relative terms. Better than what? If you're destroying, how can you be better? Now, that's how I feel about that. So I try to teach a harmony with the universe, a oneness with the universe, but I also teach concrete facts. Point A to point B. Science is all about that, correlation. If you say something, you must be able to, in effect, prove it by making it, materialize. Hearsay has no place in science. Speculation, okay, but eventually speculation must be backed up by facts. And of course, all this is limited to our limited ability as human beings to actually observe and interpret what we mean by facts. So without getting too philosophical, that's essentially the issue. I think that they've projected and pushed things so far in terms of this madness for power that they can't even stop. You see, they have made more of the world angry with them than that loves them. For instance, I think that's the root cause of why they're so afraid of the Japanese. Not so much because the Japanese have this profound technology and they're bringing Hondas and Toyotas into America. That's not it at all. They know that that same science can be adapted to nuclear weaponry, to superior ways of killing, like they have. And they also know that Japan is the only non-white country that sustained a nuclear attack. Hiroshima, Nagasaki. So in effect, the Japanese have already, quote, been nuked. And I know that they know in their hearts the Japanese have not forgotten that. So here you have a people that are so homogeneous and so close-knit and have sustained this devastating attack and are now getting so strong scientifically that they can retaliate. It's causing great fear throughout the Western world. It isn't because of Honda and Toyota. It isn't because of that at all. You see, so if you can envision that scenario, now envision the African doing the same thing, that have a bigger country and more people and scattered throughout the entire world as well as concentrated in Africa. They would become a formidable force. That's why they encourage our children to rap, they encourage our children to break dance on their heads, they encourage our children to be irresponsible, they encourage teenage pregnancy, they encourage everything negative and devastating. They encourage that. Because the best way to get a person to destroy themselves is to teach them that they are nothing. So that's what's going on. And it also has affected our adult population. Because I have seen many African people, that is to say, whatever you choose to call us, deny vehemently and almost to the death that they're not African. It seems like everybody else knows that we're Africans except us. We're treated as one people, Africans, no matter where we are. But we try to make these internal distinctions, and that's why we're being destroyed. So I can end this by saying that this idea of trying to, this sense of destroying life everywhere they go, stems from that insane desire to control. And once you've gone so far, and oftentimes it's impossible to stop. If I kill your brother, you may be angry with me, you may wish to kill me in return. But you also may be willing to forgive me. But then if I come and also kill your wife, and your child, and your cousin, and your friend, and your neighbor, I've done so much ill that there's no way you can forgive me now. There's vengeance in your heart, you see. So now I've gone so far, I can't stop. Because if I do, you'll probably destroy me, so I must try to kill you also. And in a global sense, that's how I see the Western world, the white world. They've done so much destruction and damage, even against themselves, as Hitler with the Jews. It's almost impossible for them to stop and back up. So they either have to be destroyed or whipped into shape and made to be more human. One or the other. Because at the rate they're going, as Rkhty pointed out, the whole world will be destroyed. You can't have a world of escalating violence. It simply won't exist. It cannot exist. So I think that aspect of them stems from that desire to want to stay in control of everything, and that is extremely unnatural. Nothing controls everything. Nothing.
Thank you very much, Rkhty.
Okay, I would like to just add something to what Reese was saying. Something that the ancient Kemetics themselves wrote in the 12th dynasty, in a prophecy, a very ancient prophecy about concerning the European. But whom he referred to as the Amu at that particular time in the ancient language. He said, "Beware of the Amu, because he is short of water, he is bare of wood, his feet propel his legs forever, and he does not dwell in one place. He is like a crocodile upon your shores, and he is forever trouble to you." So they gave us a warning way back many thousands of years ago about the
dynasty?
Yes.
What year was that about?
That was about 2700 BC.
And this is written where?
Well, that's in a prophecy of Rkhty. Well, it's an ancient text from one of the ancient Kemetic texts. However, that's not the only text that laments and talks about the dangerous Amu, the European, and what he's like. There are several other texts also that describe him and his way of life, and that constantly tell to beware of him. So, I mean, even thousands of years ago, he was trouble for African people, and African people wrote about it and for prosperity. So I just wanted to add that.
Yes, please. I'm glad.
To what he had said.
I didn't know that. I've been looking for prophecies that our people may have left us that would have shedded light on today's time, understanding that they studied the universe and they had great wisdom, and the wisdom text and etc., which comes out of the pyramid. So I had been looking for, without realizing, all of the words of Solomon are really relative, because they are the words of the ancient Kemites, who wrote them and who was later adapted into the wisdom of Solomon. But yes, go ahead.
There's something that's really key that I think should be brought out also. I personally don't feel that Europeans or the whites are my arch enemy in effect. And I feel that African peoples are beginning to get into a kind of paranoia. There's a broader vision, and that vision is this: they are enemies to everybody, including themselves. You see, we're so isolating it and making it they versus us type of thing. But look at Russia versus the United States. There lies the possibility of global annihilation, and that is not an African country, let's say, versus a Western country. Those are two Western countries, two so-called Caucasian countries. So I think the whites even realize that they are a problem, serious problem to themselves, not just African peoples, you see. So to me, it's far broader than that. They must be stopped. They must, because you're not just talking about the destruction separately, let's say, of African peoples, because first of all, that's not going to come about anyway. We will wake up in time. I believe this is the case. And I'm not so willing to admit that whites have the total capability of doing that anyway. Because from my studies, my nuclear studies, it's virtually impossible to engage in nuclear warfare without at the same time endangering yourself on the massive scale that they would have to do it. Because you see, African peoples are diffused throughout the whole world. The only way, the most effective way to use nuclear weapons is to get everyone concentrated in the same area and then use it once, and you've done it. But how can you use it on yourself to get the enemy at the same time, if you will? That's impossible. So I'm not worried about anything like that. What I'm worried about is the arrogance associated with their madness to dominate. Because that will lead the world to total destruction. And it isn't just African peoples versus them. It is they even versus themselves.
As a scientist, do you see the possibility, as some people have suggested, because the resources are in Africa, the devastation of water here and space, that AIDS as germ warfare has been purposely disseminated in Africa to control and to wipe out African people, that the land will be free for Europeans.
Well, I'm not an expert on AIDS, and that is a serious question. You know, I can say this, but as a scientist, we reason with data. We look at data first, and that shapes our conclusions. Based on the data that Caucasians have exhibited, I do not put it past them. In other words, anyone that would march their own kind by the thousands, by the hundreds of thousands, systematically, methodically into gas chambers and furnaces and operating on children alive and destroying wholesale humanity as vulgar and as disgusting as that is, I wouldn't put anything past the people that would do that. So my answer to your question is relative to the data that they've already exhibited and the horrible slave trade that they inflicted on us, their own internal civil war, the violence that they've wrought against each other, the 100 Years' War, the Crusades, all of their history points to, and this business about bringing in smallpox blankets to the American Indians,
Yes.
killing off hundreds of thousands of them. Then they name a scholarship, Cecil B. Rhodes, after that, which is total shame, I feel, slapped across the face of humanity. Based on that, and I could go on at length, I do not put that past them, that AIDS could have been something that was, purposely, systematically put into Africa. Because if you look at it, a good bit of this, if not all of it, seemed to come from the so-called homosexual community. But all of a sudden, that whole focus has now been shifted to the so-called intravenous drug users, because now they say we have a large black population doing that. Shifted to the Haitians, they tried that for a while, because now you have black people coming in, we've got to dump something negative on them. Somehow it's gotten all turned around and translated into, not only did we start it, we are constantly harboring it, and we're bringing it out to all the others. So you're setting, again, a condition for a destruction of a people. So once you just start destroying Africans wholesale, people will applaud and say, yes, that's the ones with the AIDS, let's get rid of them. Furthermore, their children are ignorant, they don't know anything, they don't care about anything, all they want to do is conduct themselves like fools, let's get rid of them.
That's right.
So the first stage towards destroying anything is to give it a bad name. So I wouldn't put it past them at all in terms of purposely, systematically putting AIDS in Africa. I wouldn't put it past them at all. But again, I'll go back to my former statement. Far stronger than the AIDS, than the narcotics, than the open violence, is the destruction of the minds in the school system and in the community at large. They can have Africa if they continue the way they're going. They can walk in and take Africa for a song. They won't have to fire a shot because they are making so much of the African world ignorant. Ignorant of self, ignorant of science, ignorant of unity, ignorant of higher principles. They are making beasts and dogs of us, you see. That is the more serious crime. That is the more serious danger than nuclear, than AIDS, than crop devastation, than whatever else they're doing. That destruction of the mind. That idea to encourage Africans to hate themselves and their history and their culture. Because once you begin to truly tell African history and culture, white people have no history and culture. It all comes from there. And they have the lesser role. And this idea about having the lesser role is tantamount to death to them. Again, that arrogance of wanting to have all the power. You see, so this type of conversation we're having, it could go on at length.
Yeah, I know, and I'm going to invite you back. I want to thank you so very much. I think we covered a lot of territory, very important territory. And Rkhty, again, I want to thank you
Thank you.
so very much
Thank you
for you coming. I'd like to know if, as we close, if there's a final word, anything you might want to just say.
Well, we'll let her go first.
Well, I guess since we really started talking about the calendar, that I'll just say that I think it's very important for everyone to look at the calendar project that we have done, to learn more about African science and the kind of scientific levels that African people reach in their contributions to the world. I think that all children, since we've been talking so much lately about the education of our children, that the children should be exposed to the calendar project, read the book, and study it, and the parents should help them and encourage them to read it and to think about the science and mathematics that went into the development of the calendar.
Yes, I can reiterate that and really second it, because the nature in which we did the book. Again, I said to you, I purposely put the mathematics, some of the mathematics and some of the physics into that book, because I want the person to struggle with it. I want them to encounter the page and say, I have difficulty understanding this. I'm going to sit here until I understand it. Because that is what we did as African peoples, and that is what enabled us to do all those great things that we did. And there's something else here. This Reese calendar that I was telling you about, the Gregorian calendar, which is the one we have on our walls now, which is the ancient African calendar with a new little leap year rule put in, will lose a day in roughly 3,200 years. In other words, it will be off by a day. The Reese calendar, which is the one that I invented, based on this study, won't lose a day until approximately 200,000 years. And furthermore, I proved mathematically that the solar system cannot provide you with one day. So that calendar has been submitted to the United Nations to try to replace, as a replacement for the Gregorian calendar. So the more African peoples and all people in general that have this book and understand the importance of that, the sooner that could be implemented. And it is imperative that we begin to encourage our children and ourselves to get back to being the serious scientists, thinkers, scholars, religious figures, leaders that we once were. Because our destruction is being wrought right now, a good deal of it being done by ourselves because we have no knowledge of self. And that's really the point I would like to leave the audience with. We must reclaim all of ourselves. We are not Negroes. We are not American black people. We are African peoples that were transported to America. So in effect, we call ourselves African Americans, but we are also Afro Caribbeans, Africans in Brazil. Wherever we are, we come from one family. And until we pull that family back together, then we are at risk. Thank you so much for